Hi, and welcome to Genomics in Java, a place for genomics conversations shared over our favorite cup. And today I have Dr. David Bick, HudsonAlpha Faculty Investigator and the Director of the Smith Family Clinic for Genomics Medicine. We're so glad to have Dr. Bick with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
I always love to start out these conversations by asking, what would we find in your favorite cup?
So this is my favorite cup. I think the cup really, in a way, itself sort of talks about what I do, which is I take care of children and adults with rare conditions. And for those families, we're always thinking, what more can we do for them? What's the next thing that we can do to help them? And so from that perspective, Winston Churchill's saying, never, never, never give up, I think is really appropriate to what I think I do in the world.
What a great inspiration to have and to carry with you every day. Thank you for sharing that. When we think about the work that you do, you are working to get all of the incredible research that happens out of the lab and transitioned into the clinic. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what that looks like?
Sure. The Smith Family Clinic was really designed to bring genomic medicine out of the laboratory and into the clinic. Now, there has been genetic testing for a very, very long time, chromosome analysis, microarray, testing for single genes, but now it's possible to sequence the entire genome all at once. It's called whole genome sequencing. And that test is, or has been for the most part, a research test. And so our clinic is really focused on moving that test out of the research realm and into routine, everyday clinical practice. And so my genetics clinic is really a standard genetics clinic that you can see in medical centers all around the country, but with the addition of whole genome sequencing as a test that we can deploy when it makes sense for that patient's situation. And it's been a remarkably helpful test. And here's where HudsonAlpha really comes into the picture, because HudsonAlpha was one of the first places to use the most advanced sequencing technologies. We're now using the NovaSeq sequencers, and it has allowed us to have at HudsonAlpha a clinical laboratory whereby we can receive samples from my clinic, but other physicians around the country, to perform whole genome sequencing when that makes sense as a test. And it often makes sense when physicians have tried other simpler tests and those tests have failed. Because it turns out that our knowledge of genetics is not as great as we'd like it to be. And so what happens is that patients will have a phenotype, medical conditions, that don't really neatly fit into some known genetic condition that you would test for. So if you use the whole genome, if you sequence all the genes at once, you can use that test to tell you, the physician, and you, the laboratory, well, this gene, which you really weren't thinking about, really could be a possibility for your patient. Now let's look at his phenotype, let's look at his medical condition, and see if it fits this gene that the test has highlighted.
So it brings a whole new additional layer and perspective to being able to help with diagnoses.
Yes, and that's one of the things that's happening more and more in genetics, is that genetics isn't just about trying to make diagnoses. The point of genetics and the point of medicine, the reason that I'm a physician, is that I want to help people get better. I want to help them with their symptoms, and if possible, there will be cures. And so here's where it turns out that there are more and more efforts to find treatments for these rare diseases. And so this is where whole genome sequencing and genetics in general is very valuable, because if you don't know what the patient has, it's very hard to choose a treatment that exists or to invent new treatments. And so one of the great things that's moving forward, not in our laboratory and not here necessarily, but in laboratories and new companies around the country, is something called CRISPR, where they're able to actually rearrange the DNA in a person and actually cure their genetic disease. And this is why I feel so passionate about whole genome sequencing, because I can use that as a tool to find these diagnoses and hopefully get these people into treatments.
Such an exciting time and so much promise for so many people who are waiting for answers. And to know that we're continuing to improve the technology that supports helping them to be able to get answers, to get better diagnosis, to get better treatment. With your focus being on getting all of the research from labs into clinical practice, can you talk to us about any recent publications or findings that you've had that are of interest to you right now?
Right. So one of the things that I published on recently with some of my colleagues was to develop a website and a phone app that allows physicians all over the world to have an easy place where they can go to see if a particular rare genetic condition has a treatment. And so this has really been a couple of year project to actually collect the list of all of the rare diseases and all of the treatments that are connected with that. That was a bit of an undertaking, but it's really been rather rewarding because the app and the website are entirely free. And so literally physicians on every continent have accessed the website and have accessed the app to use it, I'm presuming, in patient care when they run across a case where they have found a patient with a rare condition and are trying to figure out, like, what treatment should I use? Now, all of the information that's on these websites, all of it refers back to the medical literature. So anyone using the website would be able to find the gene, find the name of the disease, find out how frequent it is in the general population. It gives some information about the sort of treatments that are valuable. But the key thing is that every single statement in the website is backed up with the medical literature, so that the physician who is seeing the patient can then go immediately to the literature about that condition and make a judgment about whether that treatment is appropriate for the patient at that point.
What an incredible resource to have in the palm of your hands. As you talk about rare disease, can you tell us a little bit more about how you would define rare disease and about how many rare disease conditions have you included in your app?
Right. So rare diseases are actually not so terribly rare. If you look at just children who are born, 3 out of every 100 children are born with a birth defect or some other medical condition. And when we look at these rare diseases, there are a number of them. In fact, in this website, there's about 650 conditions. And these conditions that we chose for this website were ones where the treatment was connected to the underlying gene and the problem of the underlying gene. So I'll give an example. The disease phenylketonuria, or PKU, it's the heel stick that we do for children at birth. And if you have this condition, you're going to put the child on a low phenylalanine diet. And so we know that the gene mistake is connected to this problem with phenylalanine. And so that's what I really focused the website on, was genes where if you knew the gene, it would tell you to do something in particular that would help you overcome the problem related to a mistake in that gene.
What challenges and what promises do you see in the field of genomic medicine in the next decade?
Right. I think in the next decade, what we're going to see is that whole genome sequencing as a clinical test is going to become the first test instead of a test that you perform maybe after a couple of other tests have been already done. The current challenge with whole genome sequencing is in the analysis. Now, to do the whole genome itself, that might be $1,000 or $2,000 to just get the genomic data. And at present, we're getting that number to be below $1,000 to get the data alone. But the analysis of that data continues to be a challenge. It's rather time intensive because there are many genes that we don't understand completely, but also the kind of DNA changes that you find from whole genome sequencing require a good deal of analysis. Now, we do have tools here at Hudson Alpha, a tool called Codicum, that allows us to look at these genomes in a very efficient way, but still, an evaluation of a genome can still take a couple of hours by trained analysts. I think what we're going to see in the near future is the use of machine learning, some people call artificial intelligence. We're going to see the use of that technology being deployed in the setting of whole genome sequencing so that the expertise that we have in the laboratory will be transmitted, if you will, into the machine learning algorithms. And this will allow us more and more to have the machine do the analysis of the genome and thereby bring down the cost. And if we bring down the cost of whole genome sequencing into a few $100 kind of range, then it's easy to explain to the families, it's easy to explain to the physicians, and particularly it's easy to explain to the insurance companies who have to foot the bill. And one of the things that's really wonderful about Hudson Alpha, and really wonderful about the Huntsville community, is that they are so supportive of what we're doing at the clinic. We have the Hero Fund, which is a fund, a philanthropic venture where folks from the community have given money to enable us to provide whole genome sequencing for families that really can't afford it, because at this point insurance is really not covering the cost of whole genome sequencing. And so because of that Hero Fund, we can take care of families with these rare conditions who have been looking for an answer for years and years. We can take care of them, and the cost is taken care of.
What an incredible resource to be able to offer those families, and a source of hope for them to be able to have access to that and not have to worry about where they're going to get the funding from.
Right.
With all of the work that you've done, both on the research side and on the clinical side as a practicing physician, what would you say is your greatest contribution to science over your career?
So years ago, before I was at Hudson Alpha, I worked with a group at the Medical College of Wisconsin, and we were the first group to use genome sequencing to identify a rare condition that couldn't be figured out. And then with the discovery of what was the matter with this young boy, we were able to say this child needs a bone marrow transplant, which in this case was the cure for a child who was certainly going to die if we hadn't figured out what he had.
Saving the lives of individuals has got to be the most rewarding feeling. And I'm sure what kind of ignites your passion every day as you work with your patients and you work with these families to be able to learn more about the basis of these rare diseases.
Absolutely.
What, if you could, you see all of these mysteries, like the young man that you just explained, where you've got medical mysteries that you can't answer. You see families that have been searching for answers to their own diagnostic odysseys. What would be the one genetic mystery that you would hope to solve in your career?
So when I think about genetic mysteries, I really think about the fact that in humans there's about 20,000 different genes, and maybe 5,000 of them have we figured out the connection between that gene and a particular medical condition. So what I expect to see happen over the course of my career is I expect us to figure out what those genes are doing and what happens when they go wrong. But what's more important to me is that I can help in the use of our diagnostics to turn people toward treatments, particularly with these new treatments that involve actually altering the gene that has the mistake and actually fixing the genetic mistake, which would be truly a cure.
Thank you so much for everything that you and the teams that you work with do to make such a difference in the lives of the families and the patients that you work with every day. And thank you for joining us today on Genomics in Java. Until next time, stay curious.